Oh, there he goes.
Big Sky Howdy, and welcome back to another episode of World Bigfoot Radio. Today, we have a repeating guest on here, coming down from Northeast Ontario, Canada. And we're going to be talking in the second part of the show about some of the stuff that he's found this summer. He's got some pretty nifty pictures to share with us of some Sam Squatches that weren't too fast at getting the hell out of the way and actually got caught on camera. And before that, we're going to talk about somebody else who managed to pull the same thing off with video footage. 25 years ago this summer, Paul Freeman captured what is arguably the second best Bigfoot footage ever of a Bigfoot over in the Blue Mountains in Washington. And so being the aficionado that he is on this topic, Blayne is first going to discuss with us about this whole subject with Paul and his research, how he happened to be in the right place at the right time, get this video, things that surround the filming itself, other things that have to do with his research technique and whatnot, a little comparison to that, to the Patterson-Gimlin film, which, of course, everybody ranks as the #1 footage. And then, like I said, we will get on to the stuff that he has been doing this summer. So with that, and here we go with the big 25th anniversary Freeman footage show. Welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on and filling everybody in on this, Blayne Tyler.
Oh, hi, Duke. Thanks for having me back. And how's everybody doing over there in Big Sky Country?
We're wet and it's cold. It's fall. It's great. It's great to have you back on the show, though. We were just going to do this as a 25th anniversary special on Paul Freeman because, of course, this summer is the 25th anniversary of that being filmed over in the Blue Mountains there in '94. But then, of course, Blayne has also been out and he's had a summer about like mine, hasn't been able to get out and do much, but in the time that he has been able to get out and do something, he has caught things. So the second part of the show, we'll be showing those and talking about it. And believe me, it's cool, and you'll be glad that you stuck around and saw the second part. But first of all, let's get to Paul Freeman.
Oh, there you go.
Now, what's your connection to his whole footage? I know you studied this extensively, and you even picked up research techniques from this guy. And one of the things that you brought up that I found very interesting, and that I actually use the same technique, is that Paul pretty much pioneered, or at least is the most well-known for being the first one to talk about doing it, habituating Bigfoot to presence, not feeding them, but just going into the same area where they're in often enough that they get used to you and let you get close to them. And that apparently is how Paul managed to actually get video of this one. So with that, take it away, Blayne.
All right. Well, everybody knows about Paul Freeman, of course. we waited 27 years for the next major footage of a Sasquatch in the wild. It did two things. First of all, it confirmed Patterson footage, and Patterson footage also confirms Freeman's footage. But with Mr. Freeman, he kind of pioneered and was the first to get habituation footage of real live Bigfoot. And Patterson was the first to get any footage, but his style was more of a hunting style, where he just tracked them to the point where he ended up catching one in the open, and we all know that with Patty bolting. But with Paul Freeman, he worked as a watershed patroller, I guess, for the Forest Service. And he wasn't even actually into Bigfoot when he was doing the job. He just happened to come across, happened to have a great encounter / sighting of one the back of a clearing. He watched one for like a minute moseying in and out of the trees, where he got I think it was a reddish brown and around 8 foot tall. Sounds like a young adult. And so from then on, he like, geez, these things really do exist. And that was the hook for him.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that. He's doing the watersheds. He's walking around and making sure that people aren't doing things illegal and like trapping beavers or building dams or anything like that. And as all the listeners to this show are certainly aware, the running around by where there's streams, waterways, little ponds and stuff like that, great opportunities for finding Bigfoot tracks, because they have to drink just like everybody else. So they tend to show up at these places, and sometimes they make a mistake and leave tracks for you to find.
Yeah, well, I mean, with Freeman, he was finding tracks all over the place, very similar to the Bluff Creek. I call it, it's almost like a territorial battle at Bluff Creek. They were trying to run the workers out. But in this case, Freeman was patrolling the water lines, waterways, Mill Creek, Deduct Springs, and it was finding all these very good footprints of Sasquatch coming and going from the creeks. And then we all know he got the famous footage in '94 and the blues. But he also got some older footage, I think '88, maybe. I'm just going to throw that out there, of one at the back of a meadow. And it was a blob squatch. And I think his son got a picture too. So he was in a very good spot. And what people don't realize about Freeman, he also was an investigator. He didn't just get lucky the one time. He put a lot of work into it. I guess he was into it for like 15 years, give or take, depending on near the end where he got the footage, how long after. But with Freeman, he was tracking all their movements like on a map, how many times they crossed Deduct Springs at this location, all that. He was doing all that himself. And in a way, his contribution, and from my point of view, is just as significant as Patterson's, because, like I said, and like you said, he pioneered habituation, and he did all this documenting on his own, and he didn't have someone calling him saying, "Oh, there's more prints on this road, come back down." He was out in the woods figuring out their movement pattern, their travels, all on his own.
Yeah. Well, who does have somebody calling you saying they found footprints over there? Well, I mean, other than Patterson.
Yeah, right. Al Hodson was calling him all the time. "Oh, by the way, Bigfoot just attacked a road construction crew. Come down. Pretty sure you'll have a chance of finding them." Right? Like,
yeah.
That doesn't happen very often, right?
Yeah. And nowadays it's different, with the internet and the communication system that we've got. It's actually fairly easy to get reports that maybe something just happened, the previous day and blah, 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 blah. And I get a lot of those. Unfortunately, it's like, somewhere on the other side of the continent, so I can't go research it. Oh, yeah, we had a sighting in Arkansas yesterday. I'm in Montana. That's not helping a lot.
Well, yeah, well, I mentioned, I guess I'll just bring up one just so we can get back to how he got his footage. But one of the most known investigations was when some mushroom pickers, wild mushrooms, not the other ones, spotted a small family group in the same area and they relayed that information to Paul, and he went up there and he found lots of prints of 3 different sizes, and they figured that the little family group were actually hunting like rock marmots or rodents. They weren't actually after the mushrooms. And again, he found a bunch of prints. So I guess just by chance, this right place, right time, he was finding all this fresh evidence of Sasquatch activity.
Yep. Well, now he was over there in Washington State in the Blue Mountain Range where he was finding most of this.
Yeah, around, I guess, Mill Creek, Deduct Springs, and that park crosses the border of Oregon and Washington State. So without being on hand, I think most of it was in Washington, but I know he spent some time in Oregon. He had to move away after his film got put on the mainstream, and obviously everybody knows how he kind of got harassed. He lost his service job with the patrolling the waterways, and he was actually a meat cutter by trade. And so maybe he left and did that for a couple of years, and he came back and wanted to be vindicated from coming out and saying he's seen Bigfoot, right? But so he went back to work on trying to prove that Sasquatch were real, and he ran into a lot of resistance. It got even worse, even with this footage. So that sounds very familiar to Patterson had to go through that too, but not a lot of people talk about that.
Yeah, and of course, being even 25 years ago when he finally got the good footage, that's things were significantly different then. There wasn't much of any kind of media information on it. There hadn't been any shows like Finding Bigfoot. There was hardly any books out on it. So when that sort of stuff would come out, the media would go, tee hee hee, that's hilarious. Some other hillbilly thinks they saw Bigfoot, and everybody'd ridicule him into the ground, and that was pretty much the end of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, they ridiculed him. I think he was getting crank calls at night, threats. His kids were pretty much bullied out of school. It was just the very hardcore resistance to the idea of these creatures being real. And then, as we'll get into it, when he got the footage, like Patterson, he thought, there's the debate. It's over. Here's the footage. And that's not exactly what happened. It actually created more troubles for him. But, Paul Freeman was born, I think, in Airway Heights, Washington. And he was a big guy. He was 6'4", 265. So I guess he didn't have any problems walking around by himself unarmed. Or I don't know if he ever carried a rifle. Maybe one of his buddies might have. I know occasionally he'd take other people out into the woods with him. Especially
normal, non-insane predators probably thought he was way too big of an object to try and take off. Whether he had a gun or not, it's like, well, this thing's big, whatever he is, okay.
Yeah, well, we all hear him huffing and puffing going up the incline after he spotted it, and that's because he's a big guy. And, could have been a really hot, humid day. You know how it's like to try and hike around in the open sun after he came across the prints. But, so Freeman accidentally stumbled into the trade. I don't know if he had much interest in it before. I'm sure he might have seen the headlines. This is early 90s. So he's working as a watershed patroller, and he had to give that up. And then he came back to get vindication, and ended up getting the footage. But he put in a lot of time and hours off the clock or out of the spotlight to learn about their movements. And I'm glad we're doing a show on this, because I think personally he deserves a lot more credit for his contributions. I mean, everyone, and for obvious reasons, raves about Patterson, but basically Roger showed up, rode around a little bit, caught one in the open. Freeman was out every day, every month, every year for whatever 15 years, trying to get evidence, and he did a lot of work to finally end up with that footage. And how that came about was he was checking out waterways, and every morning, like at daybreak, he'd be there. But on this one particular day, his daughter I don't know if I should say her name, but her daughter, Linda, I guess she had car trouble, so he went and helped her, and he showed up late. So I guess the Bigfoot in the area, oh, well, maybe that guy isn't coming today, let their guard down. Just like in the Patterson footage, it wasn't expecting anybody to come riding in on horses. And so one or two of them just happened to go to the creek like minutes before he got there, and he actually probably scared them out of there.
Yeah, those tracks look mighty fresh. I'll give you that. Do we know what time of day it was when he actually got there?
I think I recall a video. I could be incorrect here, but it might have been like around 10 in the morning at this time. He noticed, oh, wow, look, fresh tracks on the creek. And then he had to cross over the little creek, not much of a creek. And then he noticed more coming and going from up the hill where there was more cover. And then obviously everyone who's seen the footage knows he eventually worked his way up the hill. And then the big female came out from cover, and he filmed her. And then there's some other events that go on with that footage where, in a lot of ways, we learn more from Freeman's footage than we do from Patterson's footage.
So now when the subject of the footage comes walking out in the open, he says, oh, look at him go, like it's a male, but it seems like it might have been a female.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he could tell at that point. He goes, oh, there he goes. That's a famous reference.
Yeah. Oh, there he goes. Yep.
Yeah. And when I get around to posting my vid, I might just put a S in there, sneaking in. But there's some really interesting things that happened in that footage, and everybody's done breakdown. Very informative, but from my perspective, I've actually seen them, so I can add, maybe fill in the blanks a little bit. The female was hiding on him. Obviously, they knew he was close by. And then she notices that there's, not Paul, but the Sasquatch notices that there's an infant in front of a cedar or near a cedar tree right in the middle of the pathway that the big human guy is walking up towards. So the Sasquatch is forced into making the decision to expose herself to save the infant. And that's how that whole clip came about, was the Sasquatch had to force itself into making a mistake and being caught and filmed to rescue the infant. And I know there's a lot of questions about the infant, but you see something moving, climbing up her back, and then at the very end of that footage, you see like foot and ankle kicking around when the Sasquatch was on the other side of the tree. You have to review the footage, and that was actually studied in I guess Monster Quest or Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, I think that was called. And actually you could see the ankle articulation at the very end. And they pretty much confirmed that's why the big female decided to leave the cover of safety to save the little infant from the human strolling up the path.
Interesting. So now after this happens, and the other next thing that happens, of course, is that he shifts position. I always wondered if he was still trying to look through the viewfinder of the camera and started stumbling when he was walking and then lost track of it, or what he was doing exactly, but it didn't even move. It just sort of stayed in one place, and he lost track of where it was at, and then it started moving again, and he got it on video.
Yeah, well, I guess he was pulling a Roger Patterson there, where he was running up, tripping and falling, trying to get closer, right?
Yeah.
He was going uphill. He obviously trying to film something through a little viewfinder. He had a Super 8 video cassette camera from, I don't know, the early 90s or late 80s. Kind of not the best for filming. But before I get more into that, I got to remember, Freeman's 6'4", right? And he's got his arm bent, and the camera's up at his face, whatever, 6'2", whatever the eye. and this creature is obviously at least 2 feet taller than him. And you got to kind of take that into consideration, the size of the creature, when people want to compare the size between Patty, and I call her Paula, actually. And it'd be nice if other people could do that, because I think Paul Freeman deserves it. All this work to name the Sasquatch he filmed. So I just affectionately call her Paula. And so she moves out and she starts using strategic intelligence. And a lot of people, general public, novice footers, skeptics, they don't realize how smart the Sasquatch are. And in a lot of ways, they're smarter than people. Like we're knowledge-based intelligence, and theirs is like generic, where they learn things fast, just off the hip kind of thing, right? That's layman terms.
Most of what they have to work on in their environment is just basically strategy and tactics. So it shouldn't be any surprise that they're going to be supremely good at using the environment around there strategically and tactically to keep at a reasonable distance away from humans and be able to outwit us and avoid us like 99.9% of the time.
Well, yeah, and I think with the Sasquatch is they teach their young, much like we would teach our young danger or whatever, you know what I mean? Stay away from those type of animals, or don't wander too far from camp, whatever. But I think their young learn behavioral strategies from the adults. And it's very interesting with the footage. She steps out, she brushes right through a huge cedar branch that would probably knock a human over if they tried that. And then she turns her head quick, like really fast. So that right there eliminates it's a suit, because if you can't move like that with a suit, even despise considering the size of the subject. But she also pauses and seeing if she can lose Freeman in the background cover because of her hollow hair and how their hair pick up the hue of the natural vegetation.
But she's too much out in the open in the sun and it doesn't work.
Yeah, you can actually see the sun shining off her hair, which makes on the back makes it like a kind of a silvery white. And I guess in a way they're a lot easier to see you in the shadows because you see the big black outline. But
and she could no doubt feel that sun on that spot on her back and went, "Oh damn it, this isn't going to work. I'm still out in the open."
Well, he does actually lose her even in the open, and that's their little camouflage skill coming in hand. She steps out, but because she's moving and she just brushed aside a big branch that she's easy to film, then I guess Freeman tries to get closer, loses sight of her, and she goes into freeze mode where she's just blending with the background, and she's like, I actually posted a video on this. There's 3 or 4 videos on my channel, but she's actually standing there staring at Freeman, who's trying to reacquire her, either with his naked eye or through the viewfinder. And she's right in front of him, slightly to the left, with just a little bit of vegetation. And he's having trouble spotting this 8-foot tall Sasquatch, 50 feet away, maybe not even, standing in the open.
And everybody always asked, well, how is that even possible? How can something that big just hide right out in the open and you don't see it? Well, there's the video. There's the Bigfoot doing it.
Yeah, and I'm going back to what I referenced earlier, that we, in a lot of ways, we learn just as much about with Sasquatch from Freeman's footage is their interaction and their, like with Patty, we learned their kind of a fight or flight response. And then obviously the beautiful movement of this, and we get the size and confirmation about everything. But with Freeman's footage, we get how their strategy kicks in when they can't just take off and hide in the woods. Like she's trying to make her way to the infant. And so we see Freeman filming her. He loses her. He's filming her accidentally, and he still can't see her with his naked eye when she pauses there. So it's really quite interesting. You learn a lot from Freeman's footage. And when we get into either part 2 or later on this one, my methods, I always get asked about my methods. I basically tailored my methods after those 2 footages. the Freeman and the Patterson footage, and the rest I just learned along the way. But she uses strategic intelligence and loses Freeman right in the open with a backdrop of trees.
Yeah, and that was the next thing that came up after that. He managed to bust her, quote unquote, and get video of her twice there once he lost track of her and picked it up and got some more video of her taking off again. Then after that, it looks like he tried to reposition a third time, didn't actually pick her up again. And then the Sasquatch got kind of angry that he was doing that.
Yeah. Well, even in the video, Freeman says, "Oh, there's two of them." He wasn't referring to the big female and the infant. There was a juvie coming right at him somewhere, and I can see other ones in his footage, but I'm trying to spot the one that's moving towards him. I still have trouble because of the quality, right? It's off the shelf, great, but the Sasquatch. They eventually, we'll jump ahead just quickly here. They eventually had him pinned down for 2 hours, screaming at him. Again, this was at the end of the roll or the end of his tape, and he didn't get any of the audio, but they were screaming at him for 2 hours as the ones that he accidentally got close to while chasing the adult faded into the cover of the tree lines. And so they kept him pinned there, and I guess they were pretty upset because they got a social order, right? And that they go into I'm just going to say this might not be the official Jane Goodall term, but they went into like a territorial reaction, almost like a defense with Freeman, a passive defense. Obviously be different with a human than would be with a bear going through, but they all went into like a certain mode where they all started fading back away from him, like they probably would have done normally if they had more warning. He was coming up the path, and then he actually, and I got this film on my channel, and I think you might post a clip. He actually stopped for a minute right beside a young female with an infant. He didn't even know it was there, and he actually got like a few seconds of her, like within 10 feet of him. And that could have caused the emotional reaction to his how close he was to other Sasquatch.
Good Lord. Yeah, he's lucky he got out of there in one piece. It's interesting to note he was in there at the wrong time of day. He busted one of them walking in to save an infant, appears to be a female. You're calling her Paula. I'll go along with that. So he busts Paula, gets her on video a couple times. Meanwhile, where's the alpha males? Where's the beta males? It sounds like there's female, maybe more than one, and a bunch of juvies around here. Where's the males at? Now, that would explain why they were freaking out pretty bad.
I see smaller ones in his video, and the video's not the clearest, but I would suspect that they're a little bit deeper in the tree line just because of their size. And we joked about this before. I mean, even with this 8-foot female, sometimes they get caught out in the open. There's just nowhere to hide. But normally they use their wisdom that, hey, I'm a 10-foot male. I can't just go walking down the path. So yeah. I would.
But not to cut in here, but what their tactics are usually like. If they had other Squatches around there that were adult enough to know what was going on, they would have just got back behind Paul and made a racket to attract his attention, allowing the other ones to slip away. This just tells me there wasn't any backup around there.
Well, I think the backup might have been in the wrong location. I think they're in behind the big female, so they can't really be of use to her unless they expose themselves and come out in the open. But again, habituation, he's been around them a dozen times, whatever number. So they know he's not going to be chasing after the little infants. It's just an inconvenience of this human catching them out in the open after going for a morning drink. So I think the males are there. They're just not in a particular position.
Yeah, they're on the opposite side of the female, further away from them, where they're absolutely of no use to help to distract them. So he totally caught them with their britches down, which surprises me that they didn't have at least one sentinel across the stream there keeping an eye on things until they were all done.
Yeah, well, maybe his car was far enough away and then he hiked in, or, maybe they were just getting accustomed that he's not a threat. But here's the other thing I want to throw at you, and you can play this audio later. They know what rifles are. They know what rifles do, and he did not have one with him. So the threat of being shot was not there. I'll put that out there. What do you think? No rifle?
That's true enough. I mean, if you don't have any kind of an obvious projectile weapon, you can definitely get closer to them. But they're still going to, you know, their mode of operation is don't let you see them ever. So it's still kind of surprising that they didn't have even as much as, well, the same human usually comes through this time of day. We're going to go down and get a drink. You know, you would think they would have had one on the other side of the river keeping an eye out just in case he did show up. It's kind of surprising.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I guess it's just all timing, right? You have to have fortunate timing to catch him making a mistake and caught.
Yeah.
And there might have been timing where the males already drank first and then pulled back into the shade, and then the females were coming for a second drink from early morning or something. You don't exactly know, but the males are probably definitely around. It's all timing. There's people that work very hard in the footing world, and they never get a chance to get a video of one where, you know, someone can show up at Bluff Creek and stay for a couple of weeks and film the best footage ever, and then live off that fame for the rest of their life, right? But not to take anything away from Roger. He put a lot of work in. He was an investigator too. But yeah. I think it's just all timing and, yeah, maybe a little bit of luck. But I think if you're dedicated like Freeman was, then he was probably in and around him. He just it's just fortunate enough this time to have his camera rolling, and he got the great footage.
Well, I'm not faulting him at all. I mean, his timing was spectacular. Since his timing was bad, he caught them unaware and unguarded and managed to get really close and get video, which is, you know, awesome. But I'm throwing disparagement on the males in the troop that weren't doing their frickin' job, basically. I'm saying, where were you losers that he managed to catch the female and the kids running around, the Squatchlets running around over there? Where are you guys? You're supposed to be defending them. You should be drummed out of the Sasquatch Union. Lousy job.
They were off napping after being up all night, and they went and got their morning drink, and they're having a big nap in the back or something, maybe playing some cards or something. I don't know.
Swiped a cooler full of beer from some campers or something, and they're up there checking that out. Meanwhile, she's getting busted by Paul and his video camera.
Yeah, she's like, you know, probably bitching him out later, saying, "Where's the security?"
Right. Yeah. I had to go walking across in front of that tree all by myself and grab that helpless Squatchlet up from that horrible rampaging human coming up the trail. Where were you guys at to bluff charge him and throw a log at him?
Yeah, she's like, you know, couldn't you hear him huffing and puffing coming along? What's up with that? You know, I thought you guys.
What the hell? The guy sounded like a bulldozer coming from a mile away. Where are you guys at?
Yeah, where are you males at? I mean, geez, you know, the female has to come out and defend the clan's honor being discovered, and the males are like chilling in the shade somewhere. And, you know, there must have been a big group meeting after that. Probably some people got the boot from the clan, got booted off the island or something.
I'm sure, yeah, Paula never let them hear the end of it. They're probably still hearing about it.
Yeah, well, the thing is with that is, you know, it's just all timing, and the young ones are more curious, will take more risks, right? Maybe I think we talked about this too before, where with each generation of Sasquatch, they've learned that they're not in direct competition with us anymore, like they perhaps might have been, the hunters and gatherers, and even 27 years earlier, where we're pushing roads into Bluff and Onion Creek or Onion Road there. We're not coming into direct competition for resources with them as much as even 27 years earlier. So in that 27 years, how many offspring have been born, and then they've learned that, you know what, these white skin or these humans, hunters, aren't really after us. And so that we don't have to worry about, we can let our guard down a little bit. I don't know, maybe something like that kicked in where, they got a little lax. Well,
another thing could be going on is that there's actually a larger amount of harvestable game in the contiguous 48th than there ever used to be. There's more deer now than there ever were, period. So there's plenty of game for them to go hunt. And at the same time, there's less people in the woods hunting. And when we do hunt, it's seasonal. We can't hunt year-round. There's certain things you can hunt pretty, long season, but like deer or something like that, short season, just one time of the year. Doesn't take them long to figure out that pattern. So the rest of the year, the humans are out in the woods. The only thing they're carrying a gun for is to defend themselves. They're not actually hunting. And see what I'm saying here? It's not that we aren't dangerous. We aren't competing with them because we're not taking away all the food that they need to survive. We're not out there hunting it for ourselves all the time. We're out there once a year recreational hunting. And it's like, oh, it's that season. The goofy humans with the orange outfits are out here. And I just go hide in the backcountry for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, that's exactly my point, is that we don't have to fight with them for deer. There's enough deer, there's enough elk that maybe that's changed their behavior towards them. And in this case, they got used to Paul walking all around the waterways, crossing over, stepping over their prints, and their prints stepping over his. That, okay, this guy, they've probably learned, because they're smart, that, okay, this individual, he's not after us. Because Paul mentions in his video near the end that I only see them when I'm alone. He's taking other people with him, but they only let their guard down when this person comes in the woods. And Paul, he strikes me as a very laid back personality, and so he wasn't exceptionally scared by them, or he didn't get exceptionally excited or overexcited. He just took it all in stride, and they watched that behavior. They see, okay, well, this person has caught us in the open. What's his reaction? Because obviously, they don't pretty much understand English. I don't think so. They read our body language, and they see this big laid back guy that I don't care. Go ahead, walk by me, walk up the path, get a drink. I'm not after you guys. So maybe they learned that from watching him, that, okay, he's not a threat. And then in this case, they screwed up by being out in the open at 10 o'clock in the morning when Paul's usually there at 7. But I think it's a learned behavior, but they're definitely not competing for resources like we probably had to at one time.
Yep. Yeah. I think it's fortunate that at the time that they were competing with us for resources, that there just were not that many people on the continent needing the resources. So it never got to the point where it was like, oh, we're taking all the game out of the area now. Go starve, Bigfoot. I mean, some areas in the east that may have been to a certain extent what happened, but they can move too. They can move to another area. And out here in where I'm at, the Pacific Northwest, or where you're at, that's never happened. There's never been enough humans around to outcompete them for resources. So the less we're actually hunting and competing with their resources, and the more resources they've got, the less we should expect them to be really hostile to us, unless we're doing stupid like getting in between them and one of their young or something like that. They really don't have any reason to be that hostile to us. It's mostly a territorial thing at this point.
Yeah, it's just, we were talking earlier about, you go camping where they're not expecting people to camp, and you run into problems with them, or not problems, but like vocalizations or pine cone throwing or whatever, because they're not expecting you there. They've learned that, hey, you're supposed to be back at that campsite. That's your area. We're walking through this area and come across a bunch of tents set up, and it disturbs them. So they're, they go with what they've learned, and sometimes they got to stand up for what they feel is their own territory, which protects their resources. And a lot of these areas are, areas where their children are, the little Sasquatch are running around playing like on a playground at school. And, dumb humans come in, they put a tent right in the middle of an area. And of course, the adults are going to start making themselves known that, hey, this is not a good area for you guys.
Yeah. Hey, who are these vagabonds that set up a tent city in the middle of the playground? Time for you guys to leave.
Yeah, yeah. So I can imagine, and then there's the other aspect of that: little children running around. We're 30 feet behind the tree line. There's a clan of Sasquatch. So you got to be careful with that. But I think that the off-grid camping mostly happens just with adults, and then you get the aggressive behavior, or you get audio recording. But I remember when this first came out. Wow, I mean, why this footage is more important to me, or is important to me, is I guess I'm a second generation squatcher. The first generation, that Patterson's footage was their footage, so to speak. That's when they were 20s or 30 years old, and Patterson footage came out, and they could get into it, and they could investigate it, follow it. But when that came out, I was just a little toddler. So the Freeman footage, I think I was already 20 when he got that, or something like that. So that was that's more second generation footage. And like I said before, it confirms the Patterson footage. Patterson footage confirms it as far as the Sasquatch and the body ratios and the rise pulse step and the cranial keel, the huge sagittal crest, all those biological things that we learned from watching the footage. But so in a lot of ways, the Freeman footage is mostly appreciated by our generation and older because they could relate it to the Patterson, but it's more of a second gen kind of footage. And that's why people put it up there as number 2, probably because of the blurriness. But like I said, you can learn a lot from watching this footage as far as how they react to humans being in the middle of their group.
Yeah, it sounds like a little bit of a more dangerous situation than what they were in. When they encountered Patty and she took off, like you pointed out to me before we started recording here, there's actually a tree structure right there.
Yeah, I think actually had something to do with infants being in there somewhere that were probably not captured on film. I've noticed other Sasquatch and Patterson's footage, but of course, it's just you're trying to get a picture from 101 dub overs, right? So the quality is just not there. But
yeah, it'd be fun to have the original good quality ones to look at and see if you could find that stuff in the background on them, and if they're not artifacts or if it is actually Squatch back there watching.
Yeah, I mean, with Patty, there's a lot of things in common between the two films. The water, both creatures were at the water. There's probably infant in the Patterson footage in the scrub, and then their flight response. I mean, that differentiates with the Freeman footage, but Patty bolted away kind of like a killdeer. Pay attention to me, pay attention to me, look at me walking right up the middle of the sandbar, even though she could have been a lot faster into the tree line, either to her left or right or straight ahead, than walking all the way to the right and along the whole length of the sandbar. That's what's unique about the Patterson footage. And then people ask themselves, well, why would she stay in the open for so long when the tree line was right there? It's because there were infants there too. And they did find, I think, little prints around. That I think they say that Patty and the infants walked in the creek, and that's why there's no entrance prints. But yeah, there's definitely little ones around, and that's why she was purposely trying to distract them away.
Sneaky, but still got busted. So in both situations, you've got adult females with squatchlets nearby, is what it looks like we're looking at here. And they're doing their best to get the squatchlets away from the humans. And so again, how often is a situation like this going to come up where you can do something like that, which may explain the rarity of, getting any video. We know from some other people that have got some accidental shots that Bigfoot are ridiculously fast. If they can distract you for even a split second, they can get out of your line of sight so you can't see where the hell they are. And they can drop down to the ground and spider crawl and do all this other. They can climb like an ape. Who would have thought that? But yeah, and they can swim and they can do all sorts of things. So for them getting away, They just get you to look somewhere else for a second or two, and they're going to get away. And that's all there is to it. And that's why there's not one. It's usually more than one that's around, and they're covering for each other. And they'll distract you. If one has to move, the one on the opposite side of you will make noise to distract you. So you turn your head and look in the direction of that one, and then the one that's then, since you've turned your head behind your head, will shift position, move to wherever they're trying to go to.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, I've had that happen to me subtly and very aggressively, where they're trying to distract me away. I'll just throw this in. Years ago, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, I was on a hydro cut, and I knew where a little one was. And I think I posted a video, a little brown-haired one, head sticking above a rock, and you can see its hair blowing in the wind. But I was sitting towards them, and I'd film a little bit, and just trying to hang out with them. And right behind me, whatever distance, not that far away, one went running by me and screamed, just to get me to look away from staring into the little area where visually I had the other ones pinned down. So one did that right in the middle of the hydro cut, screamed behind me, and I'm like looking around, and they got a very unique scream with their dual vocal cords. It's kind of high and low at the same time. It's really hard to explain. But yeah, so they definitely use a lot of strategy as a group. But that's one situation. But normally they just whistle, or they'll throw a pine cone in the opposite direction, the way they want you to look away. With this, you can see the Sasquatch in Freeman's footage, and I'm looking at a picture right here, where the second time he loses her, and he's panning around, and he's starting to pan right near, it's near the end of the footage, but he's going right with his camera, and then you can see the Sasquatch watching him, and starts to move left, like, from the viewer's point of view, away from Freeman, who's panning right, and his line of sight is going right. So she was outweighting him, using her natural camouflage with her holler hair, until he was looking in a different direction, and then she skulked off with the infant on her to the left and into heavier cover.
Pretty cool stuff. Now, it's unfortunate that he had to take so much flack for all of that after putting in so much effort, and then getting, considering the quality of the camera, about the best footage that he could have hoped to have gotten with it. It's just sad that people have to go through that. They gather information of these creatures, and then when it comes to the point where they can actually try and show it to somebody, then they just get attacked by trolls and skeptics, and it's not real, and it's a hoax, and blah, 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 blah. Because people are so threatened that it might actually be the truth, they react with, anger and fear, primal instinct, because they're too scared that it's going to destroy their little house of cards that they're living in.
Oh yeah. Well, I've gone through a lot of that. A lot of people have suffered through that. The more successful you are, the more hate you get, I guess. It's unfortunate. With Freeman, he, like I mentioned earlier, he was like, people were calling him at home. He was getting harassed at work. He even mentioned that there's a building full of casts that they don't want people to know about, that they just don't want people going up there where the Sasquatch are living and are moving through the area. But one thing that vindicated Freeman is he started working with Dr. Grover Krantz, and I guess he was a professor at Washington State University. Correct me if I'm wrong in the actual name. I'm not sure the university, but and do you remember this pivotal point where everyone was like going with hoaxer because of what happened on Good Morning America with him, and I'll get into that. They had him on the show after he brought his footage in, and it got put out to the network and then affiliate, and then they wanted him to come on Good Morning America, and they asked him, so have you ever made your own prints? And he said yes, and it was to practice, try to gauge how heavy the creatures were, or to try to figure out, when they're 8 feet tall, their foot's 7 feet wide or 7 inches wide at the ball. And he was doing experiments, but what they did was they cut the rest of that off, and they just stopped at yes, I do. And then they made a joke out of the out of his footage. And yeah, just hillbillies are running into them. No scholarly guy is actually out there seeing and experiencing this. So Dr. Krantz comes along and he's studying Freeman's casts, and he goes, there's dermal ridges in these casts, fingerprints, like fingerprints of a hand. And that was huge. Do you remember when Krantz was announcing that the Paul Freeman's casts had dermal ridges that could only be made by a real animal?
Yeah, that was about the first time that the dermal ridges on Bigfoot footprints, or, of course, handprints, had come up at that point.
Yeah, and he actually, I'm just going to say it the way I've read it. Supposedly, he took Freeman under his wing and said, look, this is how you pour a very good cast. He taught him about casts, and he thought Freeman was probably the best Bigfoot tracker going, since he could start from scratch and find and film them and bring back evidence as opposed to waiting for a tip from a witness. But so Dr. Krantz was on his side. There's a professor with whatever number of degrees saying these are real casts from a real animal that lives in the woods, that walks bipedal, and this man is bringing back hard evidence of this, and he's not a hoaxer. But yeah, he took a lot of flack, and I remember when his footage came out, I said, damn, that's pretty good. I wasn't jealous, but I liked studying him. But I remember that, and he didn't really, at the time, get a lot of support. There was, I guess, a lot of jealous people that this person was so good at finding evidence that they would rather smear him than support that the footage or the casts were real, even though he had a scientist saying they're real. They've got dermal ridges in them. And Bob Titmus was one. Renee DeHinden was another. Peter Byrne were all saying that this guy was just an attention seeker. And yet he could
Look
go
who's
up.
talking. Look who's talking in that crowd, that he's just an attention seeker. Oh, right. Yeah, DeHinden was an arch enemy of Grover Krantz, who spent more time fighting with Grover Krantz and saying the opposite of everything that he said than he actually did looking for Bigfoot or doing any research on it. Enough said about him. Peter Byrne, let's see, wasn't he on a Bigfoot expedition? No, he was on a Yeti expedition in the Himalayas. For how many years was it? Like 12 years? Did he find one?
No.
Let's see. And who was the other one in that group? Oh, Titmus. Yeah, okay. So anyway, yeah, sure. They wanted all the publicity because those were the guys after Roger Patterson died. And of course, Bob wasn't having anything to do with Bigfooting. They were the ones that were still around, that were the big name guys that were supposed to be finding Bigfoot for that 27 years in between when Roger filmed one and when suddenly this guy over in the Blue Mountains managed to do it, even though they had 27 years to do something in between.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm all over that with my videos. Every video I bring up or post on Paul Freeman, I bring up the gap, and I bring up, what were people doing? They're watching Mysterious Monsters with Autumn Williams. And
somebody gave them a loop tape of In Search Of, and they were just stuck in their basement watching that for 27 years.
Well, I'm sure they were doing appearances and being up on stage talking like experts, and meanwhile, Freeman had footage, real cast, had a beautiful hand cast from the same creek area. He was out in the parking lot trying to show people his real evidence that he was the real deal. And the guys who were just really good at talking about it, the entertainers, were on stage stealing all the spotlight and credibility. But anyway, so those guys were saying that Freeman was an attention seeker. And I think I remember one clip where DeHinden actually showed up to bask in some of the attention of a TV show following Freeman around and how he got the footage and the prints. And then he still has the nerve to say that about him when I'd be like, where's your footage?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
DeHinden was not at all an attention seeker. He was a celebrity because he used to do commercials for Kokanee beer, et cetera, et cetera. Need I go further? Yeah,
like I'm not rubbing DeHinden wrong. He had his place, even in his era, just getting out and looking for them, even if he didn't come back with evidence. That was huge. You're what? Yep. You're looking for the mysterious creature? That's incredible. Let's have him on the show. Yep. Now you got to pretty much film a Bigfoot attacking a bus full of kids for, maybe we'll post it on our TV show. I don't know. Not quite good enough.
Yeah.
But
There wasn't
Yeah,
enough splat when it hit the back of the bus and the end of the bus ripped off.
yeah. No, that tree just was an average size 50-footer. If it would have been in redwood, then maybe it would be good enough to be on our show. But yeah, so here's the guys. Here's the guys who were talking Bigfoot but couldn't get it done. And they
Well,
were,
I got to give Peter Byrne credit for one thing. At least they were running around investigating reports. When there was a report, they would go investigate it. Well, thank God somebody was doing it. I mean, it was boots on the ground. Even though they didn't manage to film one again or something, at least they're freaking out there trying.
Yeah, no, you're right. Nothing in that regard towards those these, I guess, icons of the field. They were doing all the behind the scenes investigations. Freeman did too, and so did Roger Patterson. Patterson actually interviewed Fred Beck about the Apes Canyon attack. So they did a lot of logging. They brought their credibility to the forefront. Like with Byrne was a big game hunter, so that helped a lot. That brought a lot of I guess media attention to it. And then obviously DeHinden, he was hanging out with John Green a lot. They did a lot of dual investigations, a lot of BC stuff into Washington State. But yeah, so at first, I don't know if they ever changed their mind about Freeman, but they didn't he didn't quite get the support that he thought he would. And then I remember, like in the general, I don't know if you call it really a Bigfoot community then, there was no real media on it. You just had to follow news clippings and the odd TV show. And this is before internet got really big. So do you remember that? There really wasn't any place to go to talk about Bigfoot except just to follow the clippings in the newspapers and stuff?
Yeah, yes, I do. Unless there was like a local Bigfoot club or organization that you could somehow stumble on, which were damn rare back then, there was absolutely no information. There was no way to network with other researchers.
Yeah, right. I mean, so Freeman wasn't in it for the fame because there was none, unless, you got footage and then you wanted for public awareness and for vindication on him because of what happened earlier with him saying he's seen these creatures, and he had the poor footage from the back of the field. And then I think his son got a picture, another blob squatch, but it's just the quality of the camera available to the researchers. But so it wasn't in it for fame, and he definitely didn't make any money at it. He actually lost money.
Yeah.
He moved away after being harassed and moved back, and then he took it up again. They say he put $50,000 of his own money in. That's a lot for a guy who works odd jobs and as a meat cutter, or I guess for the Forest Service. But so anyway, yeah, he didn't get a lot of support. Now, there was no real community to rally behind him, but there were lots of naysayers. And
Yeah, back in those days, if you came forward with a Bigfoot story or something, basically you were just going to get ridiculed and attacked, and that was pretty much it. There wasn't any, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There wasn't any TV shows that you were going to be on. If you were on the local news or something, they would just ridicule you. So, that's what always gets me about people going, blah, 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 big hoax, blah, blah, blah. They're trying to make a bunch of money. There is no bunch of money to be made. Why would anybody waste their time doing that? Now that there's an internet, sure, it's clickbait. Make a fake 5-second Bigfoot video and get 1 million views on it. Back then, there was no such thing. Why waste your time making an elaborate costume just to pull the legs on a few people? Doesn't make sense.
Well, that's right. I mean, there was no, either on national news or you're just a little byline in the back of a paper. But like I said, 27 years and we had no footage. And I think conferences were going on at that time in the 90s. So up around comes Paul Freeman, who got kind of thrust into it from like the sighting I mentioned, where he watched one for like a minute, red-haired, brown-haired, kind of colored one going through the trees at the back of a clearing. And so, I mean, wham, he's into it. He's hooked. He knows they're real. And now it's time to try and get footage because no one's believing a verbal account of his sighting. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what were these attention seekers. I mean, I know we were laughing about this, but you got the guys like DeHinden and Green or not Green, but and Byrne and the other guys they're in the news every week or in the paper, and they're complaining about a guy who actually gets footage or footprints going to the paper. And they were just talking about stories or whatever. And so that's quite really ironic that those guys were saying that he was an attention seeker.
Yeah, that's what I said. Consider the source. So there you go. So Paul only lived, what, another 3 years after he got the footage? It was diabetes that took him, wasn't it?
I think he made it to around 9 years. Diabetes, died at 59. He would have been 76 this summer. 25 years ago, he got that footage. Yeah, a big guy. I don't know if that had something to do with his diabetes. Poor situation where he never actually got the acclamation or the credit only till afterwards, until people started doing breakdowns and saying, look at the size of the creature. Look at the way the head spins. That's not a mask. It's not a suit. Look at the bulk. Look at how it just brushed through the trees, the rise pause step, and everything else with it was kind of like,
compliant gait, the leg lift, the whole thing that it, also looks exactly like Patty.
Yeah. I mean, it took a while for everyone to go, you know what, that's a real Sasquatch, because the people who spoke against them had the ear of the media, and then they kind of really put a dampener on the acceptance of the footage until afterwards, till neutral parties, educated people with lots of information about Sasquatch from other sources and the PGF started to break it down and saying, look at the arms on it and look at the way it walks and moves and et cetera, et cetera. And so he really got nothing out of it except just a lot of grief. And only until recently, and I say recently, in last 10 years or last with the internet, that people are like, respect Paul Freeman. He did a great job. That was great footage. He did it all on his own. He didn't have a semi-professional camera. He was living paycheck to paycheck, and he managed to come up with cameras and time to go do this. So, I mean, from my point of view, I think Freeman deserves to have his own Bigfoot conference. What do you think, Duke?
I tend to agree. I'm glad that we're at least doing our little part and that we can commemorate the 25th anniversary of him getting that footage. And for me, it's sort of like, commemorating the neighbors, because from where I'm sitting right now, I can look across the Bitterroot Valley and see Blue Mountain. Blue Mountain, even though it's sitting in the Bitterroot chain, is the anchor for the Blue Mountain Range that goes out into Washington, Oregon, runs east-west, whereas the Bitterroots run north-south. So, and that's where he filmed Paula. So, yeah, he's like my neighbor.
Won't you be my neighbor?
Won't you be my neighbor? Keep your Squatch over there. Keep them across your border.
I actually drove through the Blue Mountains, and I don't know how close I was to his site when I lived out west, BC, and then I came back through Washington and Oregon. And obviously you don't know where he goes, and you'd have to have him walk you in there, but I drove through that area. Have you ever been up in that area?
No, I have not been over into that area yet. This whole area is so tremendously gigantic, it's going to take me a couple decades to get around all of it.